Dallas police officer J.D. Tippit, who was killed ostensibly by Oswald shortly after the president was in the Oak Cliff section of Dallas, Reverend Theodore R. Jackman, Reverend Dr. Roy E. Davis. These were the names per Willie Somersett from Joseph Milteer on who was responsible in the kill zone in Dealey Plaza on November 22nd, 1963. It boggles my mind that this information has not been seriously or thoroughly checked out by 99% of the JFK researchers. I hope that when the dust finally settles after all these decades, the D class vindicates the claims of Willie Augustus Somerset. Because if one takes this info at face value and explores who exactly these individuals were, two things become apparent. One, the Rosetta Stone of the assassination rests at the scene of the murder of J.D. Tippit. And two, the Ku Klux Klan was far more involved in the assassination than most conspiracy theorists or the general public readily acknowledge. Davis was long linked to the Klan. He was Imperial Dragon of the Dallas KKK and a seasoned recruiter for the Klan. According to a congressional report, Davis reactivated the Klan in Louisiana in 1960. Davis himself told the Shreveport Times that he was one of the 15 men who resurrected the Klan in 1915 on Stone Mountain in Georgia. In 1955, R.E. Davis ministered the first service at a new Church of Christ less than a mile from where J.D. Tippit was gunned down 8 years later. In 1958, Davis spoke at the Adolphus Hotel in Dallas to the Oak Cliff Indignant White Citizens Council about school integration. This is his quote. I would rather die or be put in prison than allow Negro children be integrated with white children in Dallas white schools. In early 1961, Davis was cited again in the Shreveport Times as, quote, the nation's top Klan man. The Klan's main goals were, quote, states' rights, constitutional government, and white supremacy. The day before the president's death, handbills circulated around Dallas. The president was wanted for treason. From quoting John Collins here, the printing presses for this leaflet were traced to printing equipment borrowed by Roy E. Davis from one Earl Thornton. Also, at this exact same time, an inferior bloodline was being preached in the sermons of another Pentecostal trained preacher, Reverend Wesley Swift. Swift was a student at Amy Semple McPherson's Life Bible College of Angelus Temple in LA in the early 1930s when Reverend Theodore R. Jackman taught there. Swift was not only a member of the Klan, but he was a rifle instructor for it. And, I think it bears mention that the Klan even had its own intelligence organization. Wesley Swift is generally regarded as the chief proponent of Christian identity. Now, in the same circles promoting the protocols of the Elders of Zion is Reverend Dr. Theodore Roosevelt Jackman, a quote, violent associate of Joseph Milteer, per Willie Somersett, who called Jackman one of the toughest killers. Jackman, who in newspaper articles does not appear to be one of the toughest killers, fronted as an expert in Palestinian archaeology and antiquities. Jackman took speaking gigs for the John Birch Society and addressed groups like the Young American for Freedom and Daughters of the Confederacy. He was spending the early 1960s advocating against the Kennedy plan for nuclear disarmament. As the Cuban Missile Crisis unfolded, he's advocating for national defense. In Danville, last capital of the Confederate States of America, he talked heraldry. He seemed to tie his speeches to some kind of yearning for royal elite. Jackman and his ilk believed the UN would occupy the US, thinking Kennedy favored arms control and disarmament, and that would strip the US of military might. And in April 1963, Jackman spoke at the Congress of Freedom meeting in New Orleans, advocating violence as the way forward. At this meeting, attended by Joseph Milteer and Willie Somerset, assassination plots were hatched. Multiple assassination plots were hatched against political figures and prominent citizens in the U.S., but not against the president. In a letter, And General Pedro del Valle recommended Jackman provide the names of those targets put forward at the Congress of Freedom meeting to General Edwin Walker. Knight and Army Lieutenant Colonel and Reverend William Potter Gale took the goals of the anti-communist liaison to heart by organizing a paramilitary unit, the California Rangers. He wrote a tactical guide. He urged that patriotic underground army should be established, named the Rangers, who should train to assassinate, sabotage, and overthrow the people's democracy. And that's quoting Peter Dale Scott. Potter Gale was in Southern California, and he was an ordained reverend by none other than Wesley Swift in Swift's church, the Church of Jesus Christ Christian. Potter Gale and Wesley Swift are my top suspects for project managing the JFK assassination. Indeed, Harry Dean said Potter Gale was a fundraiser for the assassination. So through Gale, Potter Gale, and Wesley Swift, we can now meet individuals known to be on the ground in Dealey Plaza, not just Joseph Milteer. Edgar Eugene Bradley, he was another Southern California preacher. He was identified by Dallas County Deputy Sheriff Roger Craig in an affidavit saying Craig was saying that Bradley was impersonating a Secret Service agent in front of the Texas School Book Depository on the 22nd. Bradley not only was influenced by the teachings of Wesley Swift, and by the way, Swift prophesied in January 1963 that something was going to happen to JFK that year. And 6 weeks before the actual assassination, he's on tape saying Kennedy is entering a critical period. But Bradley was also linked to William Potter Gale. Both Gale and Swift presided over an October 1963 meeting of the Christian Knights of the Invisible Empire, where 38 members were inducted into the Klan. This was part of Swift's four-front structure. The first front was the church itself, the Church of Jesus Christ Christian. The second front was certain members were recruited to be part of what was called the Awake movement. The third front was the recruitment of more militant leaning members to join the Christian Knights of the Invisible Empire. The most militant minded of that group then would be part of the inner den, the ones who would actually go out and commit actual acts of violence. And amazingly, an FBI report from Miami says that William Potter Gale was responsible for the Birmingham church bombing of September 15th, 1963, that killed the four little black girls. Somerset filed information with the Bureau after attending a Constitutional Party of America meeting that Gale was headed to Florida to stir up trouble. Remember, JFK was in Miami on November 18th. His motorcade was canceled in that city due to Willie Somersett's recording of Milteer predicting the assassination. Where does Officer J.D. Tippit fit in? We are fixing to go in and shake it down, Sergeant Gerald Hill of the Dallas Police broadcasted a little after 1:41 p.m. on November 22nd, referring to the Abundant Life Temple. Before anyone could shake it down, however, the police were called to the Texas Theater, where Lee Oswald was quickly arrested during a screening of the Korean War film War is Hell and taken into custody. It's worth noting that, according to a 2013 Dallas magazine article, J.D. Tippit evidently worked at the Texas Theater as an off-duty officer. Thanks to research by John Collins, R.E. Davis was known to plant Klansmen to infiltrate the Dallas police. Could this have been J.D. Tippit? Tippit certainly knew those in the right-wing milieu. He was a part-time bouncer at Austin's Barbecue, which was a known meeting place for the John Birch Society. Based on the seemingly spurious activities of Tippit in the frenzied minutes of his life, final minutes of his life, it is not out of the realm of possibility to consider that if Willie Somerset was correct, Tippit's job was to probably kill Lee Harvey Oswald and advance the cover story, the the Kennedy assassin was quickly put down by the able and responsible Dallas PD. But something went awry. Maybe Oswald got privy to what was unfolding, if it was Oswald at all. But the location of that rendezvous that ended in Tippit, who was 39, being shot 4 times, is telling, given everything we have discussed here. Oswald was allegedly spotted on foot at 10th and Patton in Oak Cliff. Moments later, Officer Tippit is gunned down outside his vehicle at this intersection. The assailant, supposedly Oswald, flees the scene, ducking behind a Texaco service station. Dallas police later put out a dispatch that the suspect was seen fleeing down an alley behind the Texaco station to the door of a church, the Abundant Life Temple, located at 10th and Crawford. It just happened to be a Pentecostal house of worship run by a former Civil Air Patrol chaplain, O.B. Graham, who is tied to Voice of Healing revivalists like O.L. Jaggers, Gordon Lindsay, William Branham, Oral Roberts in Tulsa, and ultimately Roy E. Davis, one of the 3 shooters, according to Willie Somersett. Now, all of this opens the door to Jack Ruby. The morning of the assassination, Ruby saw the Welcome Mr. Kennedy to Dallas advertisement printed in the Dallas Morning News. He was actually at the Dallas Morning News offices, and he's looking at this advertisement. It was a sarcastic welcoming. He didn't realize that at first. He thought it was an actual, like a nice welcome to the president. The text was rife with derogation. Ruby noticed the ad was sponsored by a Jew, Bernard Weissman. Now, Ruby, of course, was born Jacob Rubenstein in Chicago. He thought the ad was insulting to both Jews and President Kennedy. Ruby, at this point now, becomes obsessed with the ad as that day wore on. All right, so the fact of the ad reminded Ruby of a similar ad, the Impeach Earl Warren billboard, which was adjacent off Stemmons Freeway. That was also sponsored by the John Birch Society. Ruby brought sandwiches to then the newsroom at KLIF Radio. Ruby told a buddy of his, Russ Knight, that Dallas radicals probably had something to do with the assassination. It's 4 a.m. Ruby and 2 buddies, George Senator and Larry Crawford, take a Polaroid camera and they drove to inspect this Impeach Earl Warren billboard. Ruby suspected the P.O. box on that ad was the same one as the Welcome Mr. Kennedy ad. They were slightly different. Now, the owner of box 1757, I believe, is being presented for the first time. Take a look. This is from the El Paso Herald Post, February 17th, 1961. At this time, and the time of the assassination, Roy E. Davis and his wife, Allie Lee, were living at 3311 Glen Haven Boulevard in Dallas, about 3.5 miles from where J.D. Tippit was gunned down in Oak Cliff. Sunday morning now, after Jack Ruby is arrested for shooting Oswald, Joseph Milteer is in South Carolina, and he is a happy man. When he finds out about that, he says, quote, "That makes everything perfect now. The Jews killed Kennedy and the Jews killed Oswald. Now we have no worry." It was the plan. The next phase of this plot was for Milteer and his Klan friends to make sure that the Jews were the ones to be blamed for the assassination of the president. The fact that Kennedy was Catholic is integral to his assassination, in my opinion. It cannot be separated. It is not a coincidence. Remember, there were 3 targets in the Klan crosshairs: blacks, Jews, and Catholics. Protestant Americans were wary of the first Catholic elected to higher office in the U.S. because they felt his allegiance would be to another head of state, the Pope. Whatever the motivations, ultimately of these tragic figures. White supremacy continued and continues to fester. Recognizing its role in the assassination of the president will be a cathartic step in healing our country of its greatest sin.